In America, everyone counts, and the 2020 census is how that great promise is kept. Respond today online, by phone, or by mail, and help inform hundreds of billions in funding for education, health programs, and more. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov. The White House released the Council of Economic Advisors report on the impact of opportunity zones this week. I've been waiting for this for quite some time because they kept touting it, and they kept bringing it up last night. And they said that $75 billion has been invested in more than 8,000 zip codes. So I said, let's call Dr. William Spriggs, economist at Howard University, also economist for the AFL-CIO, to give us an understanding of this. So, Bill, you've looked at the report. Is it true this $75 billion has been infused in opportunity zones, which Trump really means to black people?
Well, let's be clear about what's going on. You're favoring certain zip codes over other zip codes. So you got to figure out what's the net. So how much am I diverting from what might have happened somewhere else? So yes, they got $75 billion in investment that took place in these zones that didn't take place in the zones that didn't get the funds. But the zones that didn't get the funds weren't that similar, actually. They were a little better off to begin with. A lot of the money pumped up housing prices. We don't know how much of this was gentrification, and you got credit for this for carrying out gentrification. So their claim that housing prices went up doesn't tell me the whole story of what's going on. And it's wrong to make the parallel judgment comparison that they do between a very targeted program and universal programs that help people in all zones to try and argue, well, this was a more effective way of helping people who are poor. First off, again, we are only looking at what happened in the zip code. We don't know what happened to the people. So if a zip code gentrified, they're going to show investment. They're going to show higher housing prices. They're going to show higher income, but that doesn't mean that the people who were there before are the people who benefited. So we don't know what that really means. And again, if you look at his opposition to raising the minimum wage, which would have helped all of the people in all of the zones get out of poverty, this is probably not the most cost-effective way. The tax write-off in the opportunity zone that they're touting, you get to keep even if your investment wasn't permanent. So it allows for a lot of gamesmanship to take place. It's probably a positive. It may not be that big of a positive, but again, you got to think about it. Is it a positive on net across those who did and did not benefit?
So,
because that's what matters.
So, Bill, here's what their claim, again, from the Council of Economic Advisors. Opportunity zones have attracted $75 billion in capital investments at the end of 2019. They say $52 billion of that would not have entered opportunity zones without the incentive. That's one. The opportunity zone investments created at least 500,000 new jobs in designated opportunity zone tracts, but they don't actually say what those jobs are. Then it says from the second quarter of 2018 to the fourth quarter of 2019, private equity investments into opportunity zone businesses grew 29% relative to a comparable set of businesses not in opportunity zones. Again, who are those businesses? Who are they? Are they black-owned businesses? Are they Latino-owned businesses? Exactly what are they? We don't have that breakdown. And then they say investments in opportunity zones will lift approximately 1 million Americans from poverty. How? I mean, so you have these. I mean, so
because they're not tracking the people, so we don't know. Like I said, you don't know if this is just gentrification. Is this just somebody moving a heavy investment into Shaw here in D.C., moving out black people, and then yes, the incomes will go up, and there'll be investments, and there'll be new businesses, and there'll be higher home prices. But the people who are there aren't the ones who benefited. This isn't what they have in the report. But more importantly, did you divert money that went to Shaw and the equivalent neighborhood they are saying that didn't get the investment? So was I stealing from a ward over in Anacostia? That matters. If the incentive just shifts something away and then doesn't help some other neighborhood that is very similar, on net, you haven't done anything.
Again, looking through this report, because again, every time Donald Trump touts opportunity zones, he's doing it specific to black people. He's always saying, oh, I'm helping the blacks with opportunity zones. And then, of course, he name checks Senator Tim Scott. Is there anything in this report that actually speaks to black people benefiting from these opportunity zones? Because I'm looking, and I have, Anthony, go to my iPad. This right here shows you the geography of opportunity zones. This is the map right here, and you see the green areas is what's called selected tracts, opportunity zones. The gray area is eligible but not selected tracts. Have you seen anything that says black people are benefiting from this?
No, because that wasn't their unit of analysis. Their unit of analysis were the zip codes that were the zones themselves. So they're not doing it from a racial equity perspective. But in fairness, when you look at the zones, a lot of them out there in the West, a lot of them were very close to Navajo Nation and some other native lands. So potentially, some of the counties near tribal land might have benefited.
So let me show this here. This is the graphic they showed. Share of opportunity zone population, share of non-opportunity zone. So according to their chart, African Americans represented 24.3% of opportunity zones. Share of non is 11.4. Latino, Hispanics 25.4. People living in poverty is 28.9. But okay, so let's just.
But that was the criteria upon which the zone was chosen.
Right. But
they don't report the rise in income by race or ethnicity. So the lowering of the poverty rate, I don't know whether that's someone who's lifted out of poverty or whether you gentrified. You just moved in some people who had money and moved out the people who didn't.
And that's, again, those are important distinctions, because what it points to is how does it actually benefit anybody? So you can sit here and say, oh, my God, these things are wonderful, but it's still, what is the net effect on black people and Latino/Hispanics? That's the real deal. And the reality is this report does not make that clear. It's just, hey, $75 billion is being spent. We don't know on what. You can spend it. You can spend it in a census. You can spend it in a census tract, and it can be white developers.
It can be white developers gentrifying that neighborhood, but it wasn't done properly to answer the question it sets out to answer. I mean, this is part of the problem he had when the leadership of his Council of Economic Advisors left him. But more to the point, a lot of people like place-based initiatives like this. They compare this to other place-based initiatives that have been backed by Democrats. So in fairness, this is an idea that people favor. We have to remember that Congressman Rangel was the one who initiated the whole idea of place-based in legislation. But this report doesn't do what they say it does.
Bill Spriggs, we certainly appreciate it, sir. Thanks a lot.
Keep it real.
Just want a quick conversation with our panel here. And so, I mean, isn't that fair to ask, Melik, in terms of if Trump, every time he talks about opportunity zones, he's talking about how he's always in reference to black people. Well, shouldn't black people be saying, okay, fine, how did black people benefit? Please show me the data that shows how black people are benefiting from opportunity zones, since anytime he brings them up, it's in relation to what he's done for the blacks.
Well, I'm sure that's a valid question, and I think it's one that definitely should be asked. Whether or not they should have that data at this point, I think that they should. But just to clarify a couple of things, so I'll use DC as an example. In DC, and I'm imagining this is the case elsewhere, it's not according to zip code, it's according to census tract. And in DC, 79% of the actual opportunity zones, the zones that were approved, are located east of the river, which is in 7 wards, 7 and 8, majority Black. And there are criteria that the tract had to have in order for it to get approved in the first place. So it dealt with the unemployment numbers. It dealt with a lot of factors that I think the Trump administration could probably use from DC, because DC has done a very good job at explaining how they decided where those are. So the numbers, it seems like they really did do the 75 billion, but I do know that in places like here in DC that we do have data to show why they were located in a certain place, the criteria that they used, and I imagine at some point that the district will be able to give some sort of information on the racial impact. But the idea of opportunity zones itself, to answer your question as far as why it's linked to Black people, well, part of that is because we link these type of developments to Black people. So there are certain, when I talk about that criteria, the fact that it had to be located in certain parts, there are all these different guidelines that you have to fall back. When you're dealing in the inner city, most of us obviously live in inner cities. And so that's how Black people are impacted by it. I still think that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I still think that it's a great thing. We should continue to build upon it and add to it. But there is the responsibility on who gets these contracts. That's on local government. That's not on federal government. Local governments are responsible for. So if we want to know, just like when T.I. was talking about not being able to get, Black people not being part of this Opportunity Zone initiative down in Atlanta, well, he should use his wealth to get people together to make sure that we have a seat at the table.
Yeah,
local governments are responsible for that, not the federal government.
No, they're actually not responsible. Michael, I'm reading this here. This is the actual White House report. The Council of Economic Advisors, go to my iPad, Anthony, finds that OZs, opportunity zones, which are census tracts nominated by state governors and certified by the U.S. Department of the Treasury to be eligible for the investment tax cuts, are among the poorest communities in the United States. These communities have an average poverty rate more than double that of all other communities and are home to a higher share of African Americans, Hispanics, and high school dropouts. Even among all the communities eligible to be an OZ under federal law, every state selected communities that on average had a median household income less than that of communities that were not selected. So now, the states are selecting that, but they are certified by the Department of Treasury. But here's the thing that I'm still looking at here, Michael, and that is this here. When I say, how are Black people benefiting? When you say money is coming in, okay, what is that money going to? Is it going to business owners? Is it going to retail? Because if you look at really the people who are greatly benefiting from opportunity zones, it's folks who are in real estate, which means they're coming in, they're owning land. That's really what you're speaking about.
And different from, and I'm glad Professor Spriggs mentioned the historical context of these opportunity zones. The empowerment zones were the first to do that. Charlie Rangel, absolutely, as well as Secretary Cisneros in the Clinton administration. That's when it moved forward. And how they evaluated whether it was working was not to gentrify neighborhoods. It was to help empower the people that are there and want to stay. And I'll give you an example. A lot of folks now in this kind of gentrifying world we all live in, no matter what city you're in, clearly also here in our city here in DC, and we're trying to put obviously guardrails so there's not too much gentrification. And I don't mean to pick on Starbucks, but when neighbors used to see a Starbucks pop up, they knew they were in trouble. They didn't think, oh my goodness, services are coming to our neighborhood. What it meant,
oh my God, $5 coffee is coming.
Correct. Which meant a different kind of person, which meant different kind of condos, which meant people have to move out. And then the okie doke, they play the okie doke. Don't worry, after we rebuild your public housing complex, you can come back. Oh, of course you can come back. But we need a check for $10,000 and here's your new rent. So that's how they obviously get people out. So these opportunity zones are exactly what you said, Roland. These are different than the empowerment zones of the 90s. These dollars are going to developers to move people out and move a certain person in. That's why 7 and 8 in DC were targeted, because obviously the land values were much lower, and it was a great opportunity to move people in and get people out.
And the thing, Brianna, is real simple, and that is, are the people living there benefiting, or are they living there with a big-ass bullseye on their back and systematically being taken out and then shuffled elsewhere as those places are turned over into mixed-use development, bringing in shopping centers, bringing in high-priced condos that people simply cannot afford to actually live there?
Yes, I agree with the bullseye. Unfortunately, opportunity zones have produced very little impact from the simple fact that target small businesses, and especially Black small businesses, typically fail to qualify for the credit requirements of mainstream banks. So if anything, they have offered creative financing to gentrify poor neighborhoods and drive out residents. They create jobs for others who move in when indigenous residents can't be there anymore. And so it's really not helping as much as it needs to. I understand the concept of it, but it's hurting our people. And we need more financial literacy. We need more opportunity for Black businesses. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan, and we've seen this in Detroit for years. Most urban areas have districts where this is the case. And so I think that we need to, I understand that Trump wants to make this like how he's helped the Black community, but I think that we need to figure out a different way.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Unfiltered video in just one moment. As our community comes together to support the fight against racial injustice, I want to take a second to talk about one thing we can do to ensure our voices are heard. Not tomorrow, but now. Have your voices heard in terms of what kind of future we want by taking the 2020 census today at 2020census.gov? Now, folks, let me help you out. The census is a count of everyone living in the country. It happens once every 10 years. It is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. The thing that's important is that the census informs funding, billions of dollars, how they are spent in our communities every single year. I grew up in Clinton Park in Houston, Texas, and we wanted new parks and roads and a senior citizen center. Well, the census helps inform all of that and where funding goes. It also determines how many seats your state will get in the U.S. House of Representatives. Young Black men and young children of color are historically undercounted, which means a potential loss of funding for services that helps our community. Folks, we have the power to change that. We have the power to help determine where hundreds of billions in federal funding go each year for the next 10 years. Funding that can impact our community, our neighborhoods, and our families and friends. Folks, responses are 100% confidential and can't be shared with your landlord, law enforcement, or any government agency. So please, take the 2020 census today. Shape your future. Start at 2020census.gov.